The night was bitter, the Chicago wind cutting through me like knives. I could feel my heart pounding, but not from the cold. It was from the shock and pain of what had just happened. Cale's hand burned across my cheek, and the cruel laughter of Briar still rang in my ears. I looked up at Imelda, standing in the doorway, her face cold and unfeeling, pointing toward the alley filled with frozen trash. "That's where you belong. Let's see if some beggar picks you up," she sneered. I sank to the ground, tears mixing with the snow, unable to understand how the people I had trusted most could treat me like this. I was bare, shivering, humiliated, and the concrete beneath me scraped against my skin. The words they had spat, barren, worthless, a burden, repeated themselves in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. I couldn't move. I didn't even want to. Everything I had believed about love, about family, felt like a lie. I thought I had a life, a home, people who cared, but I was wrong. I fumbled in the snow for my phone, my fingers stiff and trembling. It had been smashed earlier in the struggle, but somehow I managed to turn it on. For 5 years, I had promised myself I would never call my family again, choosing to live my life with Cale instead. Pride had kept me from reaching out, but now pride felt meaningless. Survival mattered more than ego. With shaking hands, I dialed the number my grandfather had once made me memorize. My voice trembled as I whispered my address, barely audible over the wind. When Mr. Sterling answered, concern immediately in his voice, I felt a small flicker of hope. I wasn't completely alone. Someone was coming for me. Minutes later, headlights cut through the darkness, and a fleet of black Rolls-Royces glided silently to a stop. Mr. Sterling emerged first, his face serious but urgent. He wrapped me in a heavy coat, shielding me from the wind and the freezing cold. I felt warmth seep into my body, a stark contrast to the icy despair of the alley. As he helped me into the car, I realized that, for the first time tonight, I felt the faintest glimmer of safety, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to reclaim myself. I was numb, my whole body shaking from the cold. My fingers barely worked as I dug through the snow to find my broken phone. I had promised myself for 5 years that I would never call my family after I chose Cale over them. I thought I could handle anything, but now I had nowhere to go. With hands trembling, I picked up the phone and dialed the number my grandfather had made me memorize. My heart raced as the phone rang, each second feeling longer than the last. Then, on the very first ring, someone answered. "Miss Sloane." The voice was Mr. Sterling's, calm but full of concern. Relief hit me like a wave, but it made me cry harder. My voice shook as I tried to tell him where I was. I could barely speak, my strength failing me with each word. Through sobs, I gave him the address. The wind whipped around me, but somehow I kept talking, hoping he would understand and come quickly. I felt weak and frozen, but knowing he was listening made me feel just a little less alone. I whispered my location, my hands clutching the phone as if it were the only thing keeping me alive. My body trembled from cold and fear, but I held on. I didn't know how long it would take, but I had to reach out. I wanted help, and this call was my only chance. I could feel the snow melting on my skin from my tears, my lips numb, my voice faint. Every second that passed was agony, but I forced myself to keep talking, to make sure he understood. Finally, I finished giving him the address. I could barely hold the phone anymore, my fingers stiff and sore. I sank lower to the ground, my body shaking uncontrollably. But deep down, I felt a small flicker of hope. Someone knew where I was, someone would come. I closed my eyes against the wind, clutching the phone to my chest. My heart still raced, and my body was nearly frozen, but I knew I had done the right thing. I had reached out. For the first time since I had been thrown out, I felt the thought that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be alone tonight. I stayed there in the snow, trembling and shivering, waiting for someone to come. My body ached, my fingers were numb, and my voice was weak, but I knew help was on the way. The call had been made, and now I just had to hold on until it reached me. I could hear the sound of engines approaching, low and steady, but I didn't know what to expect. Then, bright lights cut through the darkness of the alley. I blinked against the sudden glare and saw a line of black Rolls-Royces gliding smoothly to a stop. The sight was so unexpected, so unreal, that for a moment I couldn't move. The first car's door opened, and Mr. Sterling stepped out. His face was serious, almost angry, but his eyes were full of concern. Without a word, he came to me and wrapped a heavy cashmere coat around my shoulders. The warmth hit me instantly, a stark change from the cold that had burned through me for so long. He guided me carefully through the snow, making sure no one could see me shivering and exposed. I felt the weight of the coat, the softness of the fabric, and for the first time that night I felt safe. The contrast between the freezing alley and this sudden warmth was overwhelming. He helped me into the car, and the moment my feet touched the plush interior, I felt the difference. The cold and fear that had surrounded me melted slightly as I sank into the comfortable seat. The car smelled of leather and polish, everything so clean and orderly. It felt like stepping into another world. Mr. Sterling closed the door behind me and sat down across from me. His presence was strong and steady, giving me the sense that I was no longer alone or helpless. I looked out the window at the alley behind me, dark and cold, and realized I had just left that part of my life behind. I couldn't stop staring at the luxurious interior, the quiet hum of the engine, and the way the lights reflected off the polished surfaces. It was all so different from the frozen pavement, the harsh wind, and the cruel faces that had thrown me out. The change was instant, and I could feel a small spark of hope beginning to grow inside me. Mr. Sterling didn't speak, but I didn't need him to. His calm, careful movements, the way he made sure I was covered and comfortable, told me everything. I could finally breathe, my body relaxing slightly as the warmth spread from the coat into my frozen skin. The car moved forward silently, gliding through the streets, taking me away from the alley and the pain I had just endured. I wrapped my hands around the coat, holding onto the warmth, feeling a small sense of safety for the first time in hours. The harsh night behind me was fading, and in its place, I felt the quiet power of someone who could protect me. For the first time since I had been thrown out, I allowed myself to hope that things could change. I didn't know what was ahead, but sitting there in the car, surrounded by quiet luxury and Mr. Sterling's steady presence, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I could survive this night. The car drove quietly through the streets, and soon I saw gates opening to a massive estate. It wasn't just a house. It was enormous, elegant, and surrounded by perfectly kept grounds. I could hardly believe I was going there, after everything that had just happened. As we entered, I felt my heart beat faster. The halls were wide, the floors polished, and every detail spoke of wealth and power. I followed Mr. Sterling through the grand entrance, still wrapped in the warm coat. My mind raced with fear and anticipation. Would my grandfather be angry? Would he blame me for staying away so long? Then I saw him. Grandfather stood at the end of the hall, tall and commanding. His face was stern, but his eyes softened as he saw me. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a sharp pang of anger at how I had been treated. I wanted to scream at Kale, Imelda, and Briar, but here, in this place, I felt a small part of my strength returning. He came toward me and pulled me into a firm embrace. His arms were strong, and for the first time in hours, I felt safe. "The only mistake was staying away so long," he said quietly. The words made my chest tighten, a mix of guilt and comfort washing over me. I buried my face in his shoulder, letting a few tears slip free, feeling the tension and pain of the night slowly sink into the past. After the hug, I followed him to a large room with a roaring fire. Mr. Sterling draped a soft blanket over my shoulders as I sat by the flames. The heat wrapped around me, soothing my frozen body and tired mind. I let myself relax for the first time since being thrown into the alley. Sitting there, I finally allowed myself to feel everything that had happened. The humiliation, the fear, the loneliness, it all hit me at once. I shivered, but it wasn't the cold anymore. It was the weight of betrayal and pain that I had carried for years, now fully crashing down on me. Grandfather stayed nearby, silent but watchful, giving me space to process, yet making it clear I was not alone. I could feel the love and strength in his presence, the same strength that had always been part of my family, but that I had turned away from. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe. Wrapped in the blanket, sitting by the fire, I felt some of the fear and hopelessness lift. I knew I had survived the worst of it, and for the first time, I could start thinking about what came next. The house, the warmth, and grandfather's embrace reminded me that I was no longer powerless. I could finally begin to gather myself and face whatever was coming, ready to reclaim the strength I had lost. I stepped into the warm bath, letting the water wash away the cold and grime from the alley. With each splash, I felt the tension and shock slowly leave my body. My skin tingled from the warmth, but more than that, I felt a shift inside me. The fear, the hurt, and the weakness that had held me down were fading, replaced by a sharp, steady determination. As I dried myself and slipped into clean clothes, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I hardly recognized the woman staring back. The naive, trusting version of me. The one who believed love would protect her, no matter what, was gone. In its place was someone sharper, someone who would not allow herself to be hurt or humiliated again. I took a deep breath and let my eyes trace every line of my face. The anger and disappointment I felt toward Kale, Imelda, and Briar burned steadily inside me. But it was no longer a desperate, weak anger. It was clear and purposeful. I knew what I had to do. I made a vow silently, quietly, but with absolute certainty. They would understand the true cost of what they had done to me. They would feel the consequences of their cruelty and betrayal, and I would no longer be their victim. That helpless, frightened girl was gone forever. I felt a strange pride begin to build inside me. I was Sloane Croft, not just a hurt woman, but the heiress to a vast fortune and a family with power beyond what Kale and his family could imagine. That knowledge gave me a sense of strength I had never felt before. I could use it to protect myself, to take control of my life, and to make sure those who had hurt me could never do so again. Every detail of my reflection, the set of my jaw, the sharpness in my eyes, the calm in my posture, reminded me of the change that had taken place. I was no longer afraid to face the world, no longer willing to let others decide my worth. I would stand tall, and I would act wisely and carefully to make sure justice was served. As I finished dressing, I felt a cold determination settle into my bones. The humiliation, the pain, and the rejection had all shaped me, but they would not define me. I was ready to face what came next, ready to reclaim my life, ready to make Kale, Imelda, and Briar see the true strength of the woman they had underestimated. I stepped away from the mirror with my vow clear in my mind. I was no longer Sloane the victim. I was Sloane Croft, strong, determined, and ready to take control of my future. Nothing would stop me from proving my power and showing them the cost of their cruelty. I gave Mr. Sterling permission to look into Kale's life, and he immediately began investigating everything. I watched as he carefully gathered information, uncovering the truth piece by piece. It didn't take long to see the full picture. Kale's small business was failing. He was buried in debt, barely keeping his company alive. Everything he had done, every move he made, was meant to use me for money. I realized then that all his love, all his promises, had been lies. He had never cared about me, only about what I could give him. It became clear that when I had no family to provide him with resources, he simply discarded me, searching for someone else who could give him what he wanted. The cruelty of his plan burned inside me, but at the same time, the truth made me feel stronger. I knew exactly who he was and what he had done. The investigation also revealed that Imelda and Briar had known everything. They had watched me struggle, seen Kale's schemes, and still sided with him. They viewed me as a threat to their own financial security and did nothing to stop him. Their betrayal stung sharply, but knowing their motives gave me power. Every piece of information Mr. Sterling brought back confirmed what I had already felt in my heart. I had been treated unfairly, not just hurt emotionally, but targeted for exploitation. But now I had knowledge, and knowledge was strength. I could see clearly where their weaknesses lay and how I could use that to my advantage. For the first time, I felt in control. I no longer had to wonder or guess what they were planning. I could see the truth laid out before me, and it gave me confidence. I was no longer the helpless Sloane they had tried to destroy. I had the facts, and the facts were on my side. Mr. Sterling continued his work, and I watched with quiet satisfaction as the picture of their deceit became complete. The more I learned, the more determined I became. I understood the full scale of their betrayal, and I also saw the tools I could use to make them face the consequences. The knowledge of Kale's debts, his failing business, and his selfish motives gave me clarity. I no longer needed to act blindly. I could plan carefully, step by step, knowing exactly how to turn the situation around. I felt a sense of calm resolve. Finally, I realized that their lies and schemes, their cruel behavior, had only strengthened me. With the truth in my hands, I could move forward with confidence. I was no longer a victim of deceit. I knew who my enemies were, and I was ready to make sure they would never hurt me again. The move against Kale began quietly, without noise or warning. I didn't have to lift a finger myself. Once the decision was made, everything was handled with calm precision. The effects started showing almost immediately. The first sign came when his access to credit was suddenly cut off. Banks that had always worked with him before no longer trusted his company. Overnight, his accounts changed from active to restricted. He couldn't borrow a single dollar, and every financial door that had once been opened to him slammed shut without explanation. Not long after that, his main clients began pulling away. Each one received reports about how unstable his company had become. These messages didn't mention names or sources, but the details were enough to scare them. One by one, they canceled their contracts. Work stopped. Payments stopped. His phone, which he used to brag about being always busy, became silent. The pressure grew quickly. His business couldn't survive without those clients. There were no deals coming in, no orders to fill, no income at all. Employees began calling him nonstop, asking what was happening. Some even quit on the spot, not wanting to be part of a sinking ship. 72 hours was all it took. Just 3 days, and everything he had built, or pretended to build, collapsed. The company that he had used to impress me, to impress others, simply stopped functioning. There was nothing left for him to fix or save. Then came the final blow. The bank started taking action. Without money coming in, and with no support from lenders, he couldn't keep up with his payments. Notices arrived, demanding amounts he couldn't pay. Soon after, foreclosure steps began. His assets, including the apartment he had once thrown me out of, were listed for recovery. It all happened so fast that he had no time to react. He didn't know where the pressure was coming from, who was pulling the strings, or why everything was falling apart at the same time. All he knew was that his business, his pride, his identity, was slipping out of his hands piece by piece. At the estate, I heard the updates from Mr. Sterling. I listened quietly, absorbing every detail. There was no joy in hearing about his downfall, but there was a sense of justice. For the first time, I felt the balance shift. I wasn't the one suffering anymore. I wasn't the one losing everything. The man who had hurt me so deeply was finally facing the consequences of his actions. His world, which he had used to control and belittle me, was breaking apart in front of him. And this was only the beginning. I stepped into the restaurant with Mr. Sterling, my posture straight, my head held high. I wore clothes that made me feel strong, confident, and untouchable. Every step I took was measured, controlled, and meant to show that I was no longer the woman they had humiliated. The restaurant was busy, full of people talking and laughing, but I noticed Cale immediately. He was sitting at a table, nervously trying to impress someone, clearly desperate for attention. I could see him lean forward, smile too wide, and gesturing as if trying to prove his worth. As we approached, the man Cale had been talking to looked up and froze. His eyes widened, and then a smile spread across his face. Recognition hit him immediately when he saw my name and the presence of Mr. Sterling with me. He stood and moved quickly to greet me, leaving Cale behind. Cale's face went pale. I saw the confusion and panic in his eyes as the investor's attention shifted entirely to me. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. His plans, his attempts to impress, all crumbled in an instant. Imelda and Briar were right behind him, and their reactions were almost as dramatic. Their jaws dropped, eyes widening in disbelief. I could feel the satisfaction building inside me, sharp and clear. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the first real taste of their shock, the first sign that they were starting to feel the weight of their mistakes. I smiled faintly, but it wasn't a cruel smile. It was calm and confident, showing that I had moved past fear and humiliation. The power of the moment, the complete reversal of roles, was more satisfying than I could have imagined. I walked past Cale and his family, holding my head high, and allowed the investor to continue speaking with me. I could see Cale's desperation growing, his movements becoming more frantic, but nothing he did could change the shift that had already happened. Imelda and Briar's whispers and glances only confirmed it. They were realizing, just as Cale was, that I was no longer the woman they had controlled or underestimated. The balance had shifted completely, and for the first time, they were powerless to stop it. I stayed composed, aware of every look and every reaction, letting the full effect of my presence settle in. It was a quiet, controlled moment of justice, the first step in showing them that their cruelty had consequences. As we moved through the restaurant, I felt a calm satisfaction. I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. I was simply allowing the truth and power of my position to speak for itself. The shock on their faces was the beginning of everything I had planned, and it felt like the first real victory in a long-awaited reckoning. Cale, Imelda, and Briar had nowhere left to go. Their money was gone, their connections disappeared, and their lives had fallen apart. Within days, they were forced to leave their apartment and move into a small, filthy motel. The place was infested with roaches, the beds were worn and dirty, and the smell of decay hung in the air. It was nothing like the life they had taken for granted. Briar's friends, the ones who had laughed and supported her when she looked down on others, abandoned her immediately. No one wanted to be near someone who had lost everything. She wandered the motel halls, realizing that her charm and social status meant nothing now. The people she had depended on for validation were gone, leaving her completely alone. Imelda faced her own harsh reality. The social circles that had once welcomed her with respect now ignored her. Invitations stopped coming, and whispers followed her wherever she went. The power and influence she had relied on for so long evaporated in an instant. She had no choice but to adjust to a life stripped of her status and control. Cale, once confident and arrogant, was silent most of the time. The man who had tried to humiliate me now faced humiliation himself. He looked for ways to recover, but every step he tried ended in failure. His pride offered no protection, and he felt the weight of helplessness for the first time. Meanwhile, I made a move that marked the final step of this reversal. Using a shell company, I quietly purchased the apartment building they had thrown me out of. It was more than a financial decision. It was symbolic, a statement that the tables had turned. The building that had been a symbol of my humiliation was now under my control. The day came when the eviction notice was delivered to them at the motel. I had it signed and served formally, following every legal step to ensure it was final. There was no way to argue or delay. The notice represented the consequences of their cruelty and the new reality they now faced. I watched from a distance, feeling the calm satisfaction of justice served. They had brought me to the streets, left me exposed and shivering, and now they were the ones facing uncertainty and discomfort. The reversal of fortune was complete. The motel room, the empty friends, the lost influence, it all reflected the truth of their actions. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. I didn't need to gloat. The situation spoke for itself. Finally, I knew that this moment marked the end of their control over me. The pain they had caused had been returned in a way that was fair and complete. Their new life, small and constrained, stood in stark contrast to the power I had regained. The lesson was clear. Cruelty and betrayal would never go unpunished. Cale found me at the estate, his face pale and desperate. He had chased me across the city, hoping to fix what he had destroyed, but what he saw made him stop. I was not the frightened, broken woman he had thrown out. I stood tall, calm, and strong, every movement showing control and confidence. He fell to his knees, his voice shaking as he tried to explain, trying to place the blame on his mother, on the pressures he faced, on anything but his own choices. He begged me to forgive him, to understand, to give him another chance. But I didn't feel fear or confusion anymore. I had already seen the truth, and I knew his words were hollow. I looked at him quietly and firmly. I let him see the strength he had underestimated. "You told me to see if a beggar would pick me up," I said calmly. "It seems one finally has." My voice was steady, not a shout, not a plea, just the truth, clear and undeniable. He didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The realization of everything he had lost, of how powerless he was now, sank into him. He remained on the snow, kneeling, unable to reach me or the life I had rebuilt. I turned and walked toward the house, each step steady and certain. The gates, the lights, the warmth of my grandfather's estate, it all welcomed me back, a stark contrast to the cold and humiliation I had endured. Every step reminded me that I was no longer under their control, no longer vulnerable to their cruelty. As I entered the house, I felt a sense of release. The fear, the hurt, and the doubt that had followed me were gone. I was free to live my life on my own terms. Cale, Imelda, and Briar were left outside, facing the consequences of their actions, powerless to undo what had been done. Inside, I felt the strength of my family and the security of my place in it. I was no longer a victim, no longer defined by what others had tried to do to me. I was Sloane Croft, confident, powerful, and finally in control of my destiny. That moment marked a new beginning. The past was behind me, and ahead lay everything I had earned and deserved. I was changed forever, stronger and wiser, ready to face whatever came next with calm certainty and the knowledge that I would never be broken again.